Welcome back to Lightning Intro to Coding. My name's Dennis, and today we're going to be going over CSS, or Cascading Style Sheets. You can think of CSS as instructions for how your browser should display your HTML and what different parts of it should look like in the browser. Alright, so picking up where we left off last week, we have our HTML file here, and we have our job estimate calculator here. And as you can see, it doesn't look super great right now because we didn't worry about styling pretty much at all, just worrying about what elements we wanted to use for it. So let's add a little bit of spice to it. So the first thing we want to do is create a new file here in our Explorer, and we're going to call it styles.css. And then in our HTML file, up here in the head, we want to include another link. And the relation is going to be a style sheet, and the href is a linked path to the styles file that we had just created. So we press save, and right now it doesn't do anything because the file is empty. So let's take a look inside and start writing out some CSS. So what do we actually want to do in this file? Well, we want to identify certain pieces of our HTML that we want to access and add styles to. So if we take a look back at our index.html, we can see all of our code, our visible code, is inside of the body tag. So if we go in here, we can type in body and then a pair of open parentheses. And then we can put in whatever kind of styles we want inside here. And I already have a small demo prepared here, which I'll go over, save that. And we can see everything got centered here in the center of the page. That's not the only thing that changed. So if we go over here, we changed up the font family. So the font of the page is different. It's now Arial with sans serif. The background color is white. It was white before, so that's not a clear change. We can just change this right to black. And obviously this isn't very usable at the moment, but if you wanted to make it a little bit more clear and stick to the black background color, you can do something like white, color white, save that, and boom, that. But we'll take back those changes. Margin and padding are pretty important properties in CSS. Margin is the space around whatever this object is, and the padding is the space within the object. So if you had a box, for example, around this calculator, if you raise the margin, then the job estimate calculator text here would appear further away from the calculator. But if you instead increase the padding, then the calculator itself would get smaller because it's trying to create more space between it and the container that contains it. Next up, you can see we're taking advantage of the display property here and changing it to flex, which gives us access to these next three properties. Flex direction set to column means that all the items within the body of our HTML will be assorted as a column. So one on top of another rather than one after another in a row. We are aligning items to the center, which means we're aligning it across the cross axis. So we're centering it that way. And justify content centers it vertically, the other way. And this final setting here, height, is 100% of the view height, which is basically just saying however much space your monitor is able to handle, it's going to take up all of that. So you can see it doesn't scroll any further and is perfectly centered in the page. And that is what all this stuff at the bottom here accomplished for us. All right, cool. So next up, we want to start diving deeper and adding more styling to other elements of our page. So the next thing that we can do is modify our job text element right here, the title element, which is an H1 tag in the HTML code here. So we are going to do H1, and we're going to set its color to this green color of the calculator. We're going to modify its font size, and we're going to add a margin to the top. Save that. And we can see, yeah, it did get bigger and it changed color. Looking good. Next up, we want to change the style of the text that comes under that to be a little bit more similar. So I'm going to make that kind of a grayish color. Modify the margin a bit. Next is the text below that, the to use text. going to make it a slightly lighter gray. Boom. And next we're going to style our table, which doesn't look too great right now. It doesn't look too much like a table at all. But as soon as we add these bits here, look at that. We have a pretty nice looking table. So let's dive a little bit deeper into what we actually changed in these properties here. We modified the width. Once again, it's only taking up 80% of the width that it could, with a maximum of 600 pixels, which is where it is at right now. We added a box shadow to it, and the syntax that comes after this is a little bit confusing. You can always look it up, but each number basically represents a different direction or amount of blur, and this represents the color. So we have this light little gray shadow that goes around the box here. And again, we added a margin here. This next bit looks a bit strange. We're modifying table headers that come after table and table data that comes after table. Both of these will have the same styles. They have padding and are text aligned to the left. And then just for the table header, we're changing the background color, which is this right here, and the color of the text to white. You can see that clearly. And then for table data, we're just adding a border to the bottom, and that's these gray lines here in between each. So awesome, we're just continuing to build on. But now these inputs look a little strange, and the button here is still the default HTML button styling. So let's change that. We'll add in these and save. And look at that. Now we have a fancy new calculate button and inputs that fit the page. And diving in deeper here, we're using a similar syntax that we used up here, where we're styling two different elements the same way, but we're also accessing them differently. So here we're looking for inputs that have an attribute of type that is equal to text. So if you remember back in our HTML, these three inputs, we have one that is a text input, and then we have two that are number inputs. So if we go back, this will be modifying all of the inputs, and we can see that is what happened. As for the color, or the buttons rather, here everything is as you would expect it. This cursor pointer property is new, and that just causes the pointer to turn into a hand when you scroll over. And this button hover property only applies to the button when it is in the hover state, and that's why you can see it's this darker green color that we can see up in the calculator as well. The last thing I want to show off about CSS is the different ways to access elements on the page. So we're going to add in this part right here. So here it's a little bit different. We're adding a pound symbol, which is accessing an ID. We're accessing elements with ID of materials, hours, and rate. And why are we doing that? If we go in the index, we have an ID of hours, ID of rate, and an ID of materials, which denote our different inputs. Now up here, we have already applied styling to all three inputs equally. However, with these, we're targeting specific ones. So the first input, the materials one, will be yellow, then green, then red. And IDs are the most specific type of CSS. So they will overwrite any other property that exists. So if we have a border or a background color applied to all of them at the element level, let's call it black, you see the color doesn't actually change because these have more specificity than these right here. So let's remove that and look at the last way that we can access things, which is through classes, and that's with this dot or period. And we'll go back into the HTML, and I added a class of number input to the two number inputs that we have, which means this black background color should be applying to both of our number inputs, but as we said before, IDs have higher specificity, so it's still taking these colors. But if we were to get rid of all three of them, for example, we see that only the number inputs, as we marked off with the class, turned black, while the other one remained default. And that is all there is to CSS for the most part. There are a few other ways to incorporate CSS into your code by either, instead of creating a separate CSS file, you can add a style tag inside of the head element of your HTML and just put all of the same code in there. However, that kind of makes your code harder to read. And as well, if you want to style things individually without having it apply to everything or having to specify IDs everywhere, you can also add styles inline, similar to this, so body, etc. And that's it for a quick intro on CSS. Join us next time when we cover JavaScript.